Father, help us to learn this morning how you remind us with these tokens of grace, the gospel of Jesus Christ, and use this lesson from Genesis 17 to use those as a means of trusting Him and not in anything else that He gives. And we pray in His name. Amen. So if you've been tracking with our study of Genesis, you know the themes that are running parallel through the book now. You got the theme of blessing, and you got the theme of curse. And these themes really provide the backbone of the unfolding story, the unfolding narrative in the book of Genesis. And we saw that last week with the continuation, really the expansion of the Abrahamic covenant. And we're going to see it again this morning in chapter 17 with the giving of the sign of the Abrahamic covenant in what we call circumcision. Now, believe it or not, I actually had a pretty good circumcision joke for the intro this morning, but for the sake of time, I had to cut it from the sermon. So we're just going to move right to the outline, all right? So 2 points this morning, 2 points. I debated on whether to use that one. I can tell by the reaction you are debating on whether I should have, so that's okay. We'll move on. So 2 things this morning. Number one, very simply, the blessing of circumcision, and second, the curse of circumcision. Okay, those 2 things. So let's start with the blessing then. And right off the bat, okay, let's just be honest. To even say the blessing of circumcision sounds odd. Okay, it's okay to say that. It's okay to read this and hear that and think that sounds a little weird. Circumcision is a painful, bloody act involving a very sensitive male reproductive organ. And we can just be honest here that this sounds a little weird, right? It sounds even more odd to talk about the blessing of circumcision. And so how in the world is this a blessing? Well, let me try to get at that by answering some questions, okay? We're far removed from the era in church history where this was a sign given to God's people for the continuation of remembering God's covenant promises. We're not there anymore. We're thousands of years removed from that. And so because we're so far removed, we may not really know what this is, why it was given, what its purpose is. So let's try to answer some questions to make sure we understand what this sign is here in Genesis 17 called circumcision. Here's the first question. Why a bloody sign at all? Because that's what it is. It's a bloody act. Why the bloody cutting away of a part of the body? Why didn't God choose a less severe sign for this covenant? Maybe it could have been like a piercing. Right? Could have been an ear piercing. There's a little bit of blood there. It's a little less severe. Or maybe like just a tattoo. Or maybe like a piece of jewelry or a haircut. Something. Couldn't there have been something other than this bloody event called circumcision? And so let's answer that question. Why did He choose this? There's a reason He chose this. There's a reason there's a bloody sign that signifies the Abrahamic covenant. And it's in the narrative as we've been following it. Think with me, you don't have to think that far back, where has the story of Genesis recently featured a blade that cuts in a very bloody manner? Where have we seen that recently? Well, we just saw it a few weeks ago when we were in Genesis 15. Most recently, we saw it in that covenant ceremony when God is revealing more of the Abrahamic covenant in Genesis 15. And remember what that featured. It featured a very bloody act. It featured the cutting in two of these animals and the placing of those bloody pieces on either side. And then it featured the Lord Himself passing through those bloody pieces, showing in this very visible way that God Himself would be cut off. God Himself would be cut into. He would cease to exist if He doesn't make good on His covenant promises. Remember that from Genesis 15? The bloody sign of circumcision very visibly reminds the family of that divine covenant-keeping promise of God. Every son of Abraham had a permanent sign in his very own flesh, reminding him that if God doesn't keep his promise, God himself will be cut in two in a very bloody manner. That's what this is reminding us of. This is why God chose this. Okay? But that's not all this cutting signifies. Circumcision also signifies the need for the cutting of the heart. Let me explain what I mean by that. We got on the one hand the Godward aspect of the sign, God being cut in two if he doesn't keep his promise, but then there's a responsibility on our side as God's people, or at that time at least, as God's people, to respond to him. He's calling us to engage with him. He's calling for a response with this sign. And he's calling for a response of the heart. The human heart is not soft and responsive to God by nature. It is hard and rebellious by nature. When we come into this world, we're not a blank slate. When we come into this world, we have an axe to grind. We come into this world, as we'll talk in a moment, in Adam. In Adam's sin, with Adam as our representative. We come into the world with a heart bent on running from God and rebelling against God, which means there must be a removing of this hardness and rebellion of the heart if we're going to have a saving relationship with God. And that's what circumcision is also signifying. Continually reminding God's people of the need that this needs to go from the outward body into the very inward spiritual part of our hearts. Circumcision of the flesh points to the need for circumcision, as it were, of the hearts. And this is the language that the Bible uses. I'll give you just one example. We'll look at more later. Deuteronomy 10, verse 16, God says, "Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no longer stubborn." You hear the inwardness of that? Not a mere external act or external sign, but getting right at the heart. So you see, he ordained this bloody sign as a twin reminder. Number one, that in order to receive the spiritual blessings of this covenant, the spiritual blessings that circumcision points to, we need a new redeemed heart. And then second, our only hope of that new heart is the sheer grace of God, who keeps his promise at all cost, even at the threat of being cut in two himself. More on that in a moment as well, so pin that. Well, that explains the bloodiness of the sign, but there's still other lingering questions. Like I bet you've wondered some of these questions. Why is it that only the males of the Abrahamic covenant receive the sign? Right? How come only the guys get it? Okay, verse 10, "This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised." Why not pick another sign that could be male or female? How come only the males get it? What's going on with that? Is God sexist? Okay, it's okay to ask that. He's not, but let's articulate it, because that's what maybe we feel when we read passages like this. Okay? So why just the males receiving the covenant sign? And I think there's two main reasons for that. Two main reasons why just the males are given the sign of this covenant. And the first is this. By placing the sign on the male reproductive organ, God is pointing back. He's pointing back to the inheritance of sin that we receive from our spiritual forefather Adam. The first man created, the one who was responsible for the plight of this world, the one who plunged humanity into sin and corruption. It was not Eve who stood in the garden representing you. It was Adam. And what did Adam do as your representative? How did he do for you? What did he give you? That's what this is reminding us of. It's reminding us that sin entered the world through Adam, the first representative of all of humanity. And as our representative, all that he can present as our representative to God is sin. That's it. He doesn't have any grace to present to God on your behalf. And yet, he is still representing each and every human being that comes into this world before the Lord. He continues to present humanity before God unless and until we have a new representative, a better representative. And circumcision functioned as a reminder of that fact. It pointed back to the first Adam, but now second, it also pointed forward to that last Adam. It pointed forward to that better representative, the greater Adam, the man, Jesus Christ. It was the male offspring of Abraham who would one day come to redeem God's people, to undo all that Adam did, to forgive sinners, to fulfill the promise made in Genesis 3:15, to fulfill the covenant that God is making with Abram at this very moment. It was the greater Adam. It was the Messiah who would come to be the representative of a new humanity that puts their trust in him and is redeemed in him. Circumcision was a reminder of our sin in the first Adam and of our need for salvation in the last Adam, the greater Adam, in the Lord Jesus Christ. This is why the sign was only given to males. And so we can ask, well, does that mean that women were excluded from this covenant? And the answer to that is a resounding no. Of course not. Look at the text. Look at verses 15 through 21 and look at the exact same covenantal language and promise given to Abraham, given right to Sarah. God doesn't just change Abram's name, he changes Sarai's name. He's not just blessing Abraham, he's blessing Sarah. Women are very much a part of this covenant. We couldn't fulfill the covenant without it. The offspring are whole nations made up of men and women. These are the members of this covenant. And the true children of Abraham make up anyone, male or female, who has Christ. And this is the way the New Testament applies it. This is the way the Old Testament applies it. But here's Paul from Galatians 3. Know then that it is those of faith who are the sons of Abraham. Which means if you have Abraham's faith, if you're trusting the Lord like Abraham did, male or female, you are blessed in this Abrahamic covenant. And so one more question, and then I think we'll be ready to see the blessing of this. Okay, and the last question is this. We said earlier that this is a sign and seal of God's covenant. What in the world does that mean? What do we mean by sign and seal of a covenant? See, when God gives his covenant promise, that should be enough, right? Go back to Genesis 15. God reiterates his promise that he made back in chapter 12 to Abraham. And just saying that should totally be sufficient for Abraham to believe every word that comes from God's mouth, okay, to bank on it. But God doesn't just speak it, he actually shows it. That's why he does that covenant ceremony. He's doubling down, as it were. He's not adding anything new, he's just magnifying it. He's putting it in bold, he's underlining it, he's highlighting it, right? He's making it bigger for us to see so that we have greater reason to trust him. And that's what he's doing with signs and seals of his covenant. He doesn't just tell us the promise, he shows us. God knows we need to be shown. Right? in giving us these signs and seals, he is more fully declaring to us the very promises in these very visible and tangible ways that are going to help us to believe, right? And that's what circumcision did for the Abrahamic covenant. Look at verses 10 and 11. This is the language it's used for it, okay? This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins. And, here it is, it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. What do signs do? We all know what signs do. Kids, what do signs do? What's the purpose of a sign, right? If you see restroom and it points that way, what is the sign doing? It's telling you where to find something. It's pointing you to something else. Exit this way. It's saying go here, right? And we all know what a seal does, right, kids? They eat fish and they try not to get eaten by sharks, right? That's what they do. Not that kind of seal. It's a different kind of seal. We're talking about the authenticating seal. So if you would send a letter back in Bible times, you didn't get to hand deliver it, right? But what you'd do is you would put your seal of authentication on it. There would be a ring that would have a seal, a unique seal, like your signature as it were, that you would dip in the wax, that you would press upon the document, and you would send it. And when the person got it, they would see that seal, and they would know that it's authentic. They would know exactly who it's from. And we get this. We do it today. We just do it digitally, right? Two-factor authentication. You all know about that. You have to wait for the email to come or the text message. And we have similar seals on our official documents today, right? On deeds, on notaries, on diplomas. Go home and check your diplomas, kids, and I'm sure there's a seal somewhere on there. Marriage certificates, birth certificates. Pull out your driver's license. There's a seal on it that shows that it's authentic. Even our currency has seals on them to guarantee their authenticity. Well, that's what circumcision was. It was a sign, and it was a seal of God's authenticity in the Abrahamic covenant. It was God's way of signifying and sealing his covenant promise to be our covenant Lord, and that we would be his covenant people. And in so giving that sign and seal, he is helping us to grasp it, to take hold of it, to trust it, to believe in it, to rest upon it, to more fully understand the covenant promise of blessing that comes to us through faith. Romans 4 gives us a good definition of circumcision as a sign and seal. Paul writes this in Romans 4, Abraham received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised. The covenant promise of righteousness and acceptance with God to those who believe was signified and sealed in circumcision for Abraham and for all of his descendants. It was God's declaration to Abraham, not Abraham's declaration to God. Can I say that again? It was God's declaration to Abraham, God's promise to Abraham and to all of his descendants, not their promise to God. That's what it means that circumcision was God's sign and seal of his covenant. All right, tracking with me so far? We have a better understanding of what this is now. Now we're in a position to answer that bigger question, how is this a blessing? How is it a blessing? The blessedness of circumcision comes from what it signified and sealed. It was not the sign itself, but what the sign pointed to that brings about the blessing. In ordaining circumcision as a sign of the Abrahamic covenant, God was signifying and sealing his promise of his grace to his people. God was the one communicating to the recipient God was the one adding his seal to his promise. He was the one very visibly reminding the recipients that he will never break his promise. He was marking out his people as his own. He was setting them apart. He was very visibly engaging them to respond to the promise by turning from sin and receiving the circumcised heart that's no longer hardened against God. This is why this sign and this seal, though it might, be honest, it might seem a little strange at first, really was a tremendous blessing to God's people for thousands of years. Because what it was directing them to was the God who gave it. It was directing them away from self to the God who always keeps his promises. Awakening them to their need for redemption. And showing them that the one and only place that they could find it is in the God of the covenant. See the tremendous blessedness of having that reminder from God in this covenant sign and seal. That's the blessing of circumcision that we read here in Genesis 17. But it's only half the story. Because as we've come to expect now from Genesis, there's not just blessing here, there's also curse. Right? Circumcision carried forth the blessing, but as we're going to see, it also carried forth the curse. And it does that in two ways. I think there are two ways circumcision functioned to sometimes carry forth the curse. And here's how it did it. It carried forward the curse for those who refused it and for those who trusted in it. We're going to see the curse magnified in those who refuse it and in those who trust in it. Two very different ways, right, of responding to the sign, but one and the same end, namely curse. So look at Genesis 17 and how it speaks of those who refuse to receive God's sign of his covenant. Okay, verse 14, any uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Now, that's very interesting because what that says is he's part of God's covenant people because he's part of the household. The covenant household brings him into the covenant even before he receives the sign. Think about Abraham. He was righteous by faith before he ever received the sign. He was a member of God's Abrahamic covenant before he ever got to Genesis 17. People born into this household were part of God's covenant before they even received the sign. But simply being born in the household was not sufficient, was it? Simply being raised in a Christian home doesn't forgive your sins. By refusing the sign, this person is refusing the God who gives the sign. That's the essence of it. That's what's really going on here. The person is saying, I don't need all of that. I can do this on my own. That's what they're saying. I don't need all of that. I can do this on my own. The person who refuses the sign of circumcision for him and his household is not just rejecting the sign, they're rejecting the God who gives it. And you see the end is curse, right? Instead of the cutting off of the flesh, you see that language in verse 14? He is cut off. He is excommunicated, as it were, from God's covenant people. He's putting himself outside that relationship to God, even externally, let alone internally. He is a covenant breaker. He is a covenant rejecter. He's rejecting not just the covenant promise, but the God who makes it. And so you can see the curse in those who reject the sign. But now here's maybe what's a little harder to see, but it's right here and it's throughout the Bible. It's that you can get curse not just by rejecting, but by trusting in the covenant sign. Let me explain what I mean by that. Circumcision was never given to be an object of faith. The sign and the seal was never given by God to be the object of our trust. That's just vital that we get this. It was never given to be an object of faith. God didn't say, here's the outward sign, now put all of your faith in the sign. Just get the sign and you're in. Right? Just bank on the fact that you bear the mark of God's people and you're fine. That's all you need. Rest in the... He never says that. He never says that. It was never an outward sign that saves. It was always pointing to the inward need of salvation from the Lord. Kids, think of it like this. Let's say you go on vacation. You're going to go to the beach, and there's a great big sign that says beach 100 yards this way. Imagine taking that sign down and going back home. I got the sign. Look, I got the sign. A sign doesn't do you any good. It's just pointing you to the real treasure, to the real thing that your heart desires, the real thing that your heart needs. The sign was never given to be the object of our faith. It was given to point us to the only object of faith that we need and that can save us, namely the God who gives it. And listen, the Bible is full of passages that say this. Let me give you a few to let you see this emphasis in the Bible about not trusting in religious acts, even the ones that God ordains. Can I give you some examples, okay? We heard one earlier, Deuteronomy 10, circumcise the foreskin of your hearts, okay? Pointing us not from the outward sign to the inward need. But listen to the prophets. Listen to Jeremiah. Jeremiah 4, verse 4, circumcise yourselves to the Lord, remove the foreskin of your hearts, O men of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my wrath go forth like fire and burn with no one to quench it because of the evil of your deeds. God says that to people who had the sign. He says that to the men who had the covenant sign but didn't have what the sign pointed to. Here's another one, Jeremiah 9. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will punish all those who are circumcised merely in the flesh. Egypt, Judah, Edom, the sons of Ammon, Moab, and all who dwell in the desert, who cut the corners of their hair, for all the nations are uncircumcised. And then he includes the house of Israel, who is uncircumcised in heart. The outward sign did what for God's people who were uncircumcised in heart? It did nothing for them. Look, God, I have the sign. And he said, so what? You don't have what the sign points to because you don't have me. You're trusting in your external place in God. Like, for what? Nobody's going to stand before God on the day of judgment and say, God, don't you see, I had the sign. I did the act. Circumcision was never given to be an object of our faith. No sign was given to do that. It was always and only pointing to the one who gives it. I mean, the Bible's replete with stuff like this, right? Trusting in the circumcision, trusting in the sacrificial system, trusting in the good deeds that we do, trusting in the service that we offer, trusting in religiosity, trusting in how much we wrote the tithe check for, trusting in how good our Sunday school attendance might have been, trusting in how good we have been to the people around us, trusting that we're good, decent, moral people, God, don't you see all that wonderful stuff? And God says, like, what's the point of that if you don't have me? This is how it was showing us not just the blessing, but also the curse. And notwithstanding all of the Bible's teaching on this, God's people repeatedly get this wrong. Right? Not just the old covenant people, but like right up until today. Trusting in the covenant sign is not something that just the Old Testament people had to deal with. It's something that you and I deal with today as well. Maybe it's your baptism. Maybe it's every month when you take communion, got to get those sins forgiven each month. Maybe it's a card that you filled out at one point earlier in your life. And anytime you wonder if you're still a Christian, you maybe pull that card out and say, I signed this card. I walked that aisle, perhaps. Maybe it's just you think about all the good things that you do in life. You try not to think about the bad things you do, but you know, I was really good, and I gave some money to charity recently, and I didn't cheat on my taxes. And you see how that's continuing the curse? You can find curse by rejecting God. You can find curse by trusting in something other than God to get you to God. Now, why do you think that is? Just think about that. Like, God has said so clearly, don't do that. And yet, literally, thousands and thousands of years, God's people have been doing that. Right? Throughout the prophets, saying, stop doing that. Go right into the New Testament, stop doing that. Right? Why do we keep doing it? Why do we put our trust in the signs, in the acts, rather than the God who gives the sign? Why do we do that? Can I tell you why we do it? Because sinners are always trying to make sin manageable. Right? Sinners are always looking for the path of least resistance to our sin. I can't deal with the true depths of my hard heart. I can do a sign, though. I could come to a church service. I can do the communion thing. I could give some money to charity. I can handle that. I can mitigate that risk. And as long as I'm dealing with things that I can control and I can do on my own, I don't have to face the reality that my sin is worse than I think. As long as I can trust in something that I can manage myself, I don't have to confront the reality that I'm much worse than I think. I don't just do bad things. I am bad to the core. Like, I need a new heart. When we trust in the sign rather than the God who gives it, we don't have to confront the reality that we deserve God's judgment. And there's not a thing that we can do to fix that. We try to put it in something that we could manage. When God is repeatedly telling us, even with the signs, that you can't manage this. You can't handle this. You can't mitigate those risks. Right? You can't, there's no path of least resistance. You got one and only one hope, and that is if I save you. I do it. And yet, here we are, taking the very signs that remind us that, and trying to use those as our salvation. They are not. They call us to confront the hard reality that we are worse than we think. Jesus says this, out of the heart comes evil thoughts and murder and adultery and sexual immorality and theft and false witness and slander. An outward sign's not going to fix your heart. Taking the Lord's Supper, getting baptized, giving to charity is not going to change this. It's not going to deal with this. The sign points you to the God who judges, and it points you to the God who forgives. It points you to the God who changes hearts. It points you to the God who can do for us what no hard-hearted sinner could do for themselves. If if we go to the sign and follow the directions. That's why Christianity has never been a call to some mere outward religion. It's not what it is. It's like treating a cancerous tumor with Tylenol. It doesn't get at the fundamental need to deal with the cancer that's eating away at us. This is not a call to some mere outward religion. It is nothing less than a call to a new heart. Something that only Christ can do for us. That's the difference between Christianity and this mere outward religion that so many people think is Christianity and have nothing but curse. And that's what Genesis 17 is confronting us with. It's having us look at the reality of what Christianity truly is. And it's calling us to ask ourselves the question, what's our view of Christianity? Right? What's our view of these signs and seals that God gives? What's our view of our religious acts? What are we putting our trust in? What are we resting on? Circumcision did a great job of showing our need for the cutting away of the hardness of heart, and it did a great job of showing the fact that only one person can do it. And it was the one who came to fulfill all that this sign signified, to make good on the promise that the sign was sealing. Which is why Paul says in Colossians 2, to you as a Christian, and this is where we close, in him also you were circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of flesh, by the circumcision of Christ. He was the one who was cut asunder for you. He was the one pierced for your transgressions. He was the one cut in two, as it were, for you on the cross, for all of your covenant breaking. And he is the one that this is all pointing you to. There's no other place where the blessing can be found except in the only object of faith that will save you. The one who fulfilled circumcision and everything else that's pointed to. In the Lord Jesus Christ. Trust him and not the signs that he gives you. Let's pray to that end. Lord, keep us from trusting in anything else other than Jesus. Thank you that he came for us to fulfill all these signs and seals pointed to. Thank you that he was the one pierced for us. Thank you that he was the one cut in two, that we would be made whole in the gospel. Help us to trust him more fully. We pray in his name. Amen.